How's everybody doing today? I'm Mike Landis, the Senior Director of Player Development and Operations here at the Baseball Factory and Factory Athletics. I'm really excited to be here for this webinar because as an early adopter of the K-Vest and K-Baseball and how it can really round you out and educate you to become a better hitting coach, there was also a lot that went through my head right when I first started utilizing it that I want to address here. Okay, without getting crazy technical into the numbers. We'll hit on a little bit of that. But also how I can use it to build quick, fast rapport with my athletes, show them with evidence, and build feel is the most important thing. But the first thing that I always get from anyone that we're trying to talk to about this, it's Coach Landis or Mike, how do I start? This is really confusing. And the most confusing thing is trying to take information, not be able to simplify it for your athletes. As confused as most of us feel when we started learning about things like sequencing and scap loading and making sure we're holding a hinge pattern or hip disassociation, right? When we're trying to explain these as we're learning to our athletes, they're just as confused as we are. Because to them, to be a great hitter and have a clear mind, we have to simplify it, right? Be on time, get my front foot down, and let me try to hit something round, right? With something else that's round and square it up. Okay, so how I'm gonna start today and talk just about a few things to kind of help kick off how I got started with the vest, what I utilize it for primarily. I'm talking session 1, maybe leak into session 2 with our athletes here at the Baseball Factory. And then also kind of set the tone for a different series and some other information that I can provide as I started to get more advanced and continued to learn a lot with the vest itself and how it made me an incredible hitting coach in terms of confidence for me, right? I have that confidence to say that I would hope that I'm one of the better guys in the area for this because I get to work with thousands of amateur athletes every year, especially hitters across all levels. But I'm not the same hitting coach that I am, or I'm not the style of hitting coach, and I'm not as efficient of a hitting coach as I am today if it wasn't for the folks at K-Motion. So really quickly, just want to kind of go around, and again, I'm bringing you here to our facility to kind of make it a real low level of an intensity type of webinar. I want you to feel kind of what I'm feeling and kind of get a feel for our space a little bit here. So we're going to talk about what's important, what I think is the most important thing really quickly off the bat with the K-Vest and what it can tell my athlete in the first 30 minutes or so. Okay, what numbers and metrics matter? Like what matters, especially with me with amateur baseball, I can't worry about trying to make sure that a player has, 2,000 of hand speed if he's 10 or 11 years old. How can we manipulate this great technology to all audiences across the board? And then where do I start? Again, I mentioned that a little bit before. How I build fast rapport and make a quick impact. I can get guys and create feel right away using the vest like no other product we can. And then how to plan your work and work your plan, how to keep it poignant, keep it on and keep it moving, right? And then building feel, because that's what separates the K-Vest from anything else, is the ability to build feel, right? We've understood that after we kind of go through all of this, we can touch a little bit on how I train if we want to answer some questions on the biofeedback tool and how I utilize that in later sessions to really kind of check my feel. But the one important thing, I want you to think of this analogy, right? And this is where I think baseball is kind of on a roller coaster right now with hitting and analytics and what numbers matter and exit velos and launch angles and all of these different things, right? I want you to imagine and put yourself into an F1 race team, right? I'm a huge F1 fan, so I want you to imagine that, right? And what they do all offseason and for years, and as they plan, they're building a bigger, faster race car every year, right? The bigger, faster race car, right? They're building it, the aerodynamics, the chassis, the drive, everything, power units, right? For the athletes, for our baseball players, their body is that race car. And we're teaching them, especially utilizing all of this biofeedback and utilizing the great tech and the great information and metrics that the K-Vest provides to help build them a bigger, faster race car. But we also have to remember how to plan our work, how to keep the player first and have a holistic approach, because if there's no one there to drive it, the biggest, fastest race cars in the world will be left at the end, right? We'll finish last because there's no one to drive it across the finish line. So there's a very delicate balance, and we can get into a little bit of that as well today, but I really just kind of wanted to focus on these few things and kind of put you into my shoes when I first got my hands on the technology and first learned it, 3 or 4 years ago, something like that. And the questions that kind of clouded my head constantly in what I was looking to learn right away before I decided to really get into it, really create an understanding to where I could simplify it, and then taking it the next steps further into movement screening and all those types of things, okay? So to start, what is important? And sorry, you might have to follow along with me a little bit here. What is important to me is identifying that hitting is an athletic activity, and it is a rotational, kind of like a rotational sport, right? Baseball is a rotational sport. Whether we're pitching, we're hitting, we're fielding and replacing feet, we're always working in circles and hitting on slants. So it's really important to understand how that works and to understand the concept of ground force, right? Ground force is a concept, that I've really kind of adopted into, that I love, to understand that we have to create a great base for our athletes. And everything that they push down, we're not floating off into space for a reason. Right, guys? So it's creating that ground force and being able to be strong with my lower half to create, some explosiveness there, send up that energy coming back up, rotate it, and send it out. Okay, so the first thing that I find is important, which helps me utilize someone's ability to create that ground force and to have proper body timing, is through sequencing. Right, so you might have to come over here with me real quick, over here, guys. So I'm talking about sequencing. So number one, sequencing. And most of you guys on the call, if you guys know what I'm talking about, phenomenal. If you're new to this kind of technology and stuff like that, sequencing is very, very simple concept, right? There is a kinetic chain in which my body has to use the ground, bring up the force, okay? So and I will write this stuff up again, just to take a quick step back. I'm gonna type up a quick outline, and you guys will be able, I can shoot it to you, or the lovely folks at K-Motion will be able to shoot that outline to you, in case you guys don't have the ability to screen grab it or something like that. So if I'm going to take a little guy right here, we're going to talk. Here's my little baseball player, and here's my hitter. Here's his hips. Okay, and here are his hands. Right, this isn't the greatest drawing in the world. Right, so we're here. Right, this is his ground force. Right, as he starts to use his feet properly and he lands this front foot to the ground. Right, his energy going into the ground is going to look like this. Okay. He's going to look like that. We'll mix some colors up and do it big league style. Right, he's got all of this ground force. He's pushing into the ground. Right, he is pushing that into the ground by landing on his front foot. Right, imagine a basketball player jumping, someone jumping. You push into the ground and you fire off. Right, so then as this operates, all of this energy starts to come back up into his body. Right, it's called the kinetic chain, kinetic energy. Boom, boom, it's coming back, bouncing around. You guys all know what I'm talking about. Right, so as this comes back up, we then have to take all this energy that's coming back up, transfer it up into my body, through my midsection, swirl it all around, and send it back the other direction, and the way in which the baseball came. Right, we got to send it all back out in front of us through rotation, okay? So in order to do this effectively, we want to look at sequencing, right? So with my little guy here, I'll clean up this little back energy. I call it the energy wall, but we'll talk about that another day. Okay, working through here, we want the hips to go first, the torso, right? We want his lead arm, and then we want the swing to finish. Okay, the way that works, it's the kinetic chain. And just like that amazing F1 race car we talked about, right? Brakes and acceleration, right? We want to in order to be the best race car driver, you have to be able to know when to accelerate and when to brake, and then come out of that braking to accelerate again to maintain your speed and your grip of your tires and whatnot across all those turns and corners in order to win a race. Right? Another analogy I use, if you at home, you and I, your dad, somebody splurged and bought you and I the same Ferrari, and we have the greatest Ferraris on the planet, same engine, same everything, and someone comes and tells you, hey coach, this is the best, you've got the best set of brakes on earth. This thing can stop you on a dime. And then that same guy comes over to me and says, hey man, look, these brakes are like in beta. They could be amazing, they could, not really sure. Who's going to drive that vehicle more confidently, right? So understanding how this works is going to make our hitters more confident in utilizing their body so they can get efficient outputs, right? Baseball's still output. You can't be a big leaguer if you're hitting the ball 70 miles an hour in terms of exit velo. It's not going to work, right? So how it works and what we want sequencing-wise, we want a guy to land. We want this hip to start to rotate towards the baseball. Then everything kind of starts to rotate after that, right? The kinetic chain, 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, we got both hands going now. Then when this hip gets to where it needs to go, it's going to have to stop and hit the brakes and send that energy to the next part of the body, which is our torso, right? So the pelvis stops, boop, torso, bang, right? Now I get my power hand gets in here, right? We deliver the contact on the same plane, boom, that stops, and then this finishes, okay? It's a kinetic chain and it's sequencing. And we want to see a couple different sequences that I'm okay with, to be completely honest with you guys. 1, 2, 3, 4, we say is perfect, right? So we're looking for a 1, 2, 3, 4 sequence, right? Or because a lot of players on outside pitches have a tendency to move, or some guys have a little extra, we call it buggy whip, and you know, so you have a little extra snap where they're here and this tweak movement, right? And some guys are teaching that. They're teaching this like momentum-free swing where it's here and creating this snap, so that the K-Vest will start to read this top hand. We'll start to read the third sensor, you know, as a movement, so we're okay with 1, 3, 2, 4. If you watch the way that, you know, even I swing, right? Or 1, 2, 3, 1, 3, 2, 4. A lot of guys on outside pitches will come here, start to work, but they'll set their swing plane slightly out in front of them so that they can connect and catch up and drive the baseball the opposite direction, okay? So we're good with 1, 2, 3, 4, or 1, 3, 2, 4. So after I look at this with an athlete, I simply just say, okay, 1, is he on time? Because a lot of times we'll immediately throw guys to the wolves and say, hey man, this is the first time you're seeing a BP thrower. Here's a K-Vest. It's going to show us what's going on. And we got guys diving all over the place. They're off timing. Their hands are creeping in because they were way ahead of it. So we want to make sure, here we make sure that we use that vest to measure them off the tee, where we can try to sync up some timing and kind of get some raw data, like when they're not using the momentum and the force of, you know, a pitch coming in. Some easy front toss where they can time it up. And then we'll also, you know, do some BP. But we will not throw a vest on someone cold. I know movement screens need to be done cold, completely understandable. But the vest, I want that done after they've warmed up, after they've hit, because I'm giving that athlete, right, the longest period of time to get loose and get ready to perform at a high level so I can get real data and make an impact. If a player is out here and the guy's throwing too slow of a front toss or too slow and he's bouncing it and they're all drifting in and they don't feel like they're on time, all this data is going to be for absolutely nothing for me, because again, hitting is about vision and timing, period, right? It's about vision and timing. We have to know when to break and when not to break. So if they're out here trying to figure it out and we're getting a bunch of bad swings and bad data, you're doing yourself a disservice because you can't help them as quickly as you can. But we're doing the player, the athlete, a much more disservice because we're not giving them the best chance to succeed in an environment we control. That's what's so cool about the vest, guys, is we get to control this. Very few things in baseball can I control as a hitter. I can't control what someone's going to throw. I can't control, but I can control a smarter, more efficient way to prepare and build myself a better race car, so I can then teach myself how to drive that car to be more efficient when the game actually matters in between the white lines through a 7 or 9 inning process, okay? So after sequencing, so when I take a look at that, if guys are slightly off, you know, we try to take a look at why. We look at the graph, okay? And then I'll add in, we might add in a clip of me breaking down a graph really quickly, or I can just jump to it and show you guys what I'm looking for. But essentially, in a quick nutshell, we want that graph, all those, you know, the lines are coming together. We want to see those sharp peaks, one coming right after another, right? And that's the contact point, right? Coming after another. We want to accelerate through contact kind of a thing, right? So we'll look at that. If there's not enough separation, it could be jammed up a little bit. We could, you know, they could have a hard time scap loading or something like that, okay? But then the next thing I look at is, as, you know, when I talk about importance, so we just said sequencing. Number 2, you know, I just said I look at the graph. And I don't need to know the exact specifics of the graph. I just need to know what I kind of want the shape to look like at first. We're going to deep dive later, you know, through their training plan, right? We're going to create sustainable and simple right away to get the buy-in and build rapport with the athlete. Okay, the number 3, I'm going to look at posture, right? And what is that? Coach, what is it with the vest? How can I measure posture? Okay, and that's just with some of our bends. And I'm just going to give you 2 examples of some of the bends and things that I like to work at. We can deep dive into it later. But when it comes to posture, okay, the most important things that hitters can have, right, is we want to start in that hinge position. And we want to maintain posture through the swing. right? And I'll show you what that looks like here in a second. And then I call it the hip flip. So do some of the folks at K-Baseball. They call it the hip flip. But what we're looking for with an athlete, right, is I'm looking for him to have some of that hinge. Now, I don't care what the actual stance looks like, because it doesn't matter. Because he could stand like this and then get into that position, that we call it the launch position. On the vest, it's that process to getting to heel strike, the load, the launch, the fire, whatever the heck you guys want to use. It's all good. It's all gold. It's perfect. But we want to see a guy maintain this hinge, right, to make sure that I can rotate separately, independently of my upper body, okay, because that's what's also really, really important, okay, to know about hitting. If I can't rotate my hips and my upper body in some way, you know, adversely, I think the word hip disassociation is like the buzzword, right? If I can't do this, I don't have the ability to adjust effectively to pitches. Because as I'm starting, because my hips and my lower body are pretty much going to do the same thing on most of the pitches that are thrown to me in terms of like what it looks like and the timing of it. But I have to then adjust and make sure my hands are behind so that if there's a late breaking ball or a slider or, you know, something up and in, I have the ability to adjust to direct my barrel. If I'm going all at one time and my hands creep up into here, I have no shot at making any kind of adjustment whatsoever, okay? So think about this, and this is what I tell our athletes. If you stand straight up and hold your hips like this and rotate your hips, you're gonna notice, because your spine is straight, you're gonna have to rotate your shoulders and your hips at the same time. So how can I rotate my hips without rotating my shoulders? We just have them step while they're doing this, get into a hinge position, and now they're gonna start to see that kind of different. They're gonna start to feel that, oh, okay. Some of them are still gonna do that, that's what we do with movement screens, are still gonna do this, but we wanna get that hip boom and see that, okay, that's how I do it. I take the weight of my upper body off of my hip joint. Now I can rotate, right? It's why you don't run straight up in football. Now, Forrest Gump made it happen, but you're not gonna be able to do that when you run through the hole. Can't do, bang, we're not in an athletic position, okay, to be able to do that, all right? So the hinge position, maintaining the hip flip, we wanna make sure that through that process, right, we wanna see, when I'm talking about this, we wanna see a positive side bend, like positive is toward the plate, and then that hip flip with the pelvis, we wanna rotate it here, and what I call the hip flip, boom, we wanna get that glute tucked under to make sure that my hip is now in a negative bend, right? So that side bend becomes forward bend, here, bam, just like this, and we want that hip somewhere between, I don't know, 0, which is straight up, is fine a little bit, but back in, you know, something where it's 0 to, I like -6, -7 degrees. So if we're taking a look at it, I'm gonna use it in blue, at the hip angle for a player, so the spine here at contact. Okay, if we're looking at the graph, you see I want it, you know, and it's pointing, you know, in this direction, going negative on his little graph here. So I want it somewhere between -0 degrees and I won't say 7. We'll say 7 degrees. And some younger guys, if they're softer on their front, will be at +1, which is okay, right? But what we don't want is we don't want that chest. We want that chest behind my belt buckle. And if my chest can stay behind my belt buckle, that'll kind of fix a lot of things, and at least make sure that I can match plane, right? And the reason why we want that is through what we've learned. Pitchers are gonna throw a baseball, there's my little pitcher, on the mound. He's gonna throw the baseball downhill, right? And if I'm sequencing properly, that the vest has told me, okay, we're 1, 2, 3, 4, or 1, 3, 2, 4, then as a hitter, we'll even give him a bat this time, is gonna be able to rotate and get those hips on plane to match that. So if a pitch on average, a 90-mile-an-hour fastball, just so you know, we're taking it a little bit advanced, is gonna descend to earth at about 6 degrees. It's moving downward, 6 degrees. My hip has to then move upwards. Similarly, it could be anything, you know, 0, again, in that range. So 1 degrees to, you know, -6 or 7, whatever. It's gonna be different for each kid, right? To match that plane. So they're gonna have to match that plane. And what we have found through measuring a ton of swings with the vest and other, you know, swing stuff that we've used is that my hands always seem, when we're connected properly and on time, to follow the tracking of my hip. So it gets here, my hip gets to here, and at some point my hands, my barrel will get onto that path. So getting those hips on plane as being on time is absolutely huge. Probably one of the most important things. So I look at these two things. Right now I look at some other things if I need a deep dive or the player already has an understanding. I look at creating stretch, right? That stretch number where our torso, when this starts to rotate towards contact or at heel strike and first move, my torso will technically go negative, be somewhere negative, you know what I'm saying? Because this is going towards the pitcher and this is going back, right? That's gonna tell me if the player is scap loading. But other than that, that's where I start. I start by looking at sequencing. I start by reading the graph, okay, which I can dive into in a bit. And I start with looking at posture. And if I do that, if I build that feel and create that and build my drill work just around getting him to hold a PVC pipe and torquing that hip forward, right, or creating some resistance or understanding sitting on a bucket and standing up and getting into that posture and feeling it, creating that feel on their own, it's gonna help them get a little bit more confidence when they start to hit missiles in our cages right away, which is massively, massively, massively huge. Then, at that point, right away, I can then move into my next session where I'm gonna use some biofeedback possibly, or I'm gonna start to create a little more feel, or utilize the vest to actually give them some of that biofeedback, like the Pavlovian response, and get that stuff like that, but that's for another day. But I appreciate you guys, and I hope I kept it simple enough to look at these few things. Sequencing, pop the graph, and look at just a few things, right? That hinge positioning and where that hip flip's gonna go, right? That forward bend at contact, okay? And then if you do that and can make a player understand that simple thing, even if you just stay here for your first 2 or 3 sessions, which is what I do all the time, okay? You can build rapport with them, make them feel really, really confident. You can plan your work. If I'm gonna say 2 lessons here, a lesson, and use the graph to create this, and we're gonna do a whole lesson plan on doing drills and biofeedback, then those things. You can also add a virtual piece into it and go over some numbers if you can read them. And make sure your hitting program's sustainable, where kids are getting better when they're not with you. And that's what you need to get to. Because players are only with you for an hour, 2 hours, max a week. They're not with you the majority of their careers. So it's all about using this vest, building feel to empower your players to get better when they're by themselves and not with you all the time. Guys, I really appreciate your time on the webinar. I'm gonna close this thing out and jump into some questions and answer some stuff that you guys may have. I really appreciate you guys listening in, and we're good to go.
I think we have 1 or 2 questions that came in for Mike.
And for any other baseball folks on, feel free to type in your questions if you have any for Mike. So one question, Mike, that we got is, as a baseball coach, there's a lot of new technology in baseball. How easy do you find or difficult do you find is it to learn, 3D data capture?
Ooh, it depends on how you segment it, really. If you take it from like a slow moving forward, where you're focusing, and the cool thing that the K-Vest does, utilizing the 3D technology, is more to assess cause. If you understand and how to initially just break off and say, okay, this analytical data is providing effect, exit velos, things like that, and then this 3D piece of technology is teaching cause, it puts you in a different learning mindset for it. I don't think that it's difficult at all when you understand how, what you're trying to teach, how it feels for yourself, and then kind of what all those bends and things mean. And like, I'm not as nearly as much of an expert on this vest as Ben was, or Justin, or even you guys, but I've found all the different nuances that really help me and help my audience. And I've really stuck to learning those very, trying to at an expert level. But there's always something to learn. But it's not difficult to do as long as you commit to it and understand the kind of confidence it gives you as a coach, and you'll be spot on.
So you can simplify it as much or as little as you
Oh,
need,
yeah.
right? Yeah, as you mentioned in your segment, sometimes you're just looking at sequencing. That's it, right? Because you want to see what that looks like, and then kind of dive deeper into the other stuff as you go.
Yeah, for sure. Because again, baseball is probably one of the most resistant games to change ever. And we're following the coattails of golf and this great technology that they're able to use. that, yeah, you can, I've spent 2-3 sessions just on sequencing to try to get a player to understand how to, and the drill work, just how to make sure that our hips are at least at the similar timing of our torso and not just lunging everything forward. Because when you're younger, we're taught to swing with our hands in this, and we're taught not to strike out, not to, put a great athletic swing on a baseball, not how to generate power or line drives. We're taught not to strike out so you don't cry, so we can retain you to play baseball.
Yeah,
Right?
exactly.
We have to get to a healthy point where, we're teaching body movements and what it feels supposed to look like, so that when their body gets bigger and faster through maturation, they can emulate the same feel we worked on sequencing in that one little piece when they're 15, if they never hear me again, something they took when they were 10. Okay, well, at least that's going to stay the same, right?
Yep. Yep.
So yeah, you can simplify it a ton.
And that kind of segues into the next question from Ed Mitchell. Ed, how are you? And this might be for all the panelists. How young of a player will you guys use the K-Vest on? And obviously the younger kids are very hypermobile, but how young will you guys use the system on?
So we've used it on younger players, like very young players, just to test it out to see if it's even worth it. And this is actually something that would probably maybe more easily be answered by Justin or Ben, even with how young they go with golfers. But for me, I don't see any. I mean, there's benefit to it, of course, but I don't use it on anybody less than like 11 or 12. And I also do it based on their physical. If a 12-year-old, you guys see these massive 12-year-olds that are in the Little League World Series, and we've worked with those players before, and I might use it with them if their body's a little bit more, into it. Or I might just simply put the vest on them and just get an idea for sequencing to see how they're timing their body up, take it right off, do a bunch of other things. Because again, the body changes, and I'm not a biomechanist. I'm not a physical therapist. I don't know how, the body's going to develop with every guy. But yeah, just to answer your question a little bit more specifically, I try not to do it on anybody that's, less than 12 years old, but it does have benefits.
Yep, definitely comes.
There needs to be a level of understanding.
Right, that's where that maturity also comes in.
Mm-hmm.
Really quick before we go to the next, I know we're over time, so if anybody needs to jump, that is okay. We are going to be emailing out this recording to everyone that registered, whether you're on or not. So just to let everyone know that we will be sending this out if you need to get out of here.
And also, I will, as I mentioned in the video, I will draft up a quick outline of those top 3 things that I do with a couple of examples, and I'll shoot that over. Or if anybody needs to email me, I can put my email address in the chat for everyone.
For sure.
That's great. Yeah, thank you.
Mike, we got one. How much, you spoke about this as well. I think just some clarity here. How much pelvis bend do you typically like to see, with a player when they are getting into contact? I think you were going through this with the webinar.
Yeah, and I don't know if I misspoke. I think I said pelvis bend. I think it's actually technically like what the torso is doing, or the forward bend at contact. We want to see something that's close to 0 or slightly negative, right? So if you're standing up and you imagine like leaning your chest back, but not really leaning your chest back so that your belt buckle is like in front of your swing through contact. So I want to see something that's like 1 degree to -7 degrees at the end, or like, getting through contact with that hip flip, because that's how I know that their swing is going to follow and create plane and hit the bottom part of the baseball. Mm-hmm. If they're on time, obviously. But yeah, I want to see that, because I want to make sure that we are, driving the baseball with a line drive trajectory and things like that. Because a lot of times kids will lean forward. Like if you stand up and just put one foot in front of the other and just going to lean and lunge forward, you can't really swing anything very powerfully. You can't really utilize your core and utilize your glute and so that's like the toughest thing that players have. And that they understand the ability to use their glutes. You don't think, like everybody always says, hitting comes from the back hip and then, using the ground and firing your lower half. But people don't realize how important the glutes are to that explosion, like getting to transfer that energy from the bottom to your midsection. But yeah, I want to see something that's almost straight up, maybe slightly lunge forward is fine. And that's at contact. Because through contact, a lot of those guys, we're going to break our front knee. We're going to lean forward because we're going to start running to first base. So through, like right at the contact, I want to see something with +1 to -7.
Perfect. Yeah. I mean, and that loss of bend with the pelvis, I mean, not even just with hitting, it's the power source for everything.
Mm-hmm.
Throwing, the golf swing.
Yeah, I got to figure out the golf swing thing. I no bueno here.
Everybody's trying to figure that out. Well, awesome, Mike. It looks like we have one more question. This might be for Ben for golf, but before we jump into that, Mike, any last thoughts, remarks on the baseball side of things?
No, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. This was kind of like a basic, like one step, but kind of if anyone's going to utilize the K vest, that's what you can really utilize it for, to keep it simple and to build rapport with athletes. And it's this like wow factor of evidence too, to give to them. So it's an incredible product. I thank you guys, and I'm excited to come back on at some point and talk about something different.